Please, stay with us!
Nature never forgets what.
The afternoon sun burned over the marine park, throwing shards of light across the blue surface of the pool. The stands were alive families pressed shoulder to shoulder. Kids waving souvenir fins, phones lifted high to capture what promised to be another flawless performance. At the center of it all stood Jessica Radcliffe wetsuit, glistening, a calm smile steady on her face. For nearly a decade, she had worked beside Kate, a 6-ton orca, whose sheer power was matched only by the loyalty Jessica believed they had forged. To the crowd, it was a picture of harmony woman, and whale a duet of trust. But nature rarely plays the role we assign it. Beneath that mirror-bright surface was a current older than any bond, a force that had not been bred out by years of shows and applause. Orcas are hunters by design, muscle instinct, and senses tuned to detect the faintest hint of prey. And on this day, Kate's focus carried a sharper edge. Her movements were deliberate, her circles tighter like a predator measuring the space around her. No one in the grandstands noticed. They clapped, they laughed, they leaned forward for the best angle on their screens. But if you had been standing there only feet away from the black and white shadow gliding below, would you have felt it? Would you have caught the subtle chill that something sacred was beginning to crack? Within minutes, the cheers that shook the air would splinter into screams, and the name Jessica Radcliffe would be carried far beyond this stadium, etched into a story where wonder and terror collided. For most of the trainers at the park, shows were about spectacle, perfectly timed leaps, synchronized splashes, the kind of stunts that sent audiences on their feet. Jessica was different. She treated every routine not as a command to be executed, but as a conversation to be earned. With Kate, she built something that seemed to defy the rules of captivity, a language of small gestures, subtle eye contact, and unspoken trust. Audiences often swore they could see it, that almost magical connection. Kate would erupt from the water in a soaring arc, droplets suspended in the sunlight like shards of glass, while Jessica stood balanced on her back hair, whipping in the spray. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the line between human and predator had dissolved into something transcendent. But Jessica understood better than most that magic was fragile. She had seen flashes of Kate's primal nature before a sudden snap at a floating object, a low vibration rolling through the water like a warning from the deep. Those moments had passed, quickly dismissed by others as quirks of behavior, but Jessica never forgot them. She believed the years together, the endless hours of rehearsal, the quiet moments before dawn when only trainer and whale shared the pool, had woven a bond stronger than instinct. She trusted Kate and she trusted the work. What Jessica did not know, and what no amount of training could erase, was that instinct never asked permission. It waits silent and ancient for the right moment to surface. And when it does, it doesn't negotiate. It takes. On this stage, under a golden sky and the roar of applause, that moment was inching closer. None of the smiling families in the stands had the faintest idea. None of them saw the shadow beneath the tide shifting its weight. October 6th arrived like a postcard from summer sky, flawless air humming with excitement. The grandstands at Oceanland overflowed, every seat crammed with spectators clutching sodas, popcorn, and cotton candy. Children pressed against the railings, eyes wide, voices tumbling over one another as they chanted Kate's name. It was the park's signature program, Ocean Pulse, a routine Jessica had performed hundreds of times. For her, preparation was ritual. She zipped her wetsuit with steady hands, checked her dive belt, and ran her fingers over the laminated cue cards. Even though she knew every move by heart, calm, methodical, deliberate Jessica was never one to rush. Backstage, Kate surfaced in the holding pool, her immense head breaking the water in slow motion. For a moment, she hovered there, blowhole, exhaling a deliberate stream before slipping back under. Jessica smiled, taking it as a sign of readiness. But there was something different. The Orca's passes were slower, closer to the platform. Her gaze locked on Jessica with unusual stillness. Trainers often spoke about the look, the dark, unreadable eyes of a killer whale. Today, that look lingered. What Jessica and the crowd could not hear was the sound carried through water alone, faint, searching exhalations. Orcas cannot smell the air, but in the water, their ability to detect the faintest trace of blood is unmatched. Somewhere hidden from human senses, a signal was already drifting through the pool, a whisper sharp and metallic. To Kate, it meant one thing, and one thing only: prey. As the music swelled and the gates opened, Kate glided into the show pool with deceptive calm. The first cues went flawlessly: towering breaches, powerful tail slaps drenching the front rows, the audience erupting with delight. Yet beneath the choreography, a deeper rhythm pulsed. Kate's focus tightened, her movements circling back again and again to Jessica, as though tethered by something more than routine. Instinct, ancient and coiled, had awakened, and it was waiting for its moment. The opening minutes of Ocean Pulse unfolded with mechanical perfection. Kate's immense body cut through the water like a blade, breaching high, twisting midair before crashing back in a thunder of spray. The crowd roared, swept up in the spectacle, their cheers echoing against the concrete stands. To anyone watching from above, it was flawless. But on the trainer deck, Jessica sensed something different. Between every trick, Kate lingered closer than usual, her dorsal fin carving slow arcs, her gaze never straying. It wasn't the playful curiosity of a partner waiting for the next signal. It was fixed, unbroken, like a predator calculating distance. Jessica adjusted her gestures, softening her cues, using the subtle hand motions that usually reassured Kate. The Orca responded, but there was a stiffness, a hesitation, as if following the commands out of habit rather than trust. Twice Jessica noticed Kate breaking formation, veering wide, circling back with deliberate slowness. From the stands, these deviations were invisible. The music covered the pauses, applause drowned out the silence. But on the deck, a junior trainer frowned, leaning forward, reading what the crowd could not, the tension tightening in every measured flick of the Orca's tail. Jessica tried to quiet the unease pressing against her chest. She reminded herself of the years they had shared, medical checks, endless rehearsals, and the unspoken rhythm they had once moved in underwater. She believed those hours had built something unshakable. Yet in Kate's black eyes, a shadow stirred like a storm cloud gathering far offshore. It was the reminder every trainer lived with, whether they admitted it or not. These animals were not performers. They were apex predators. And even the strongest bond lived under the weight of that truth. The next act was designed as a triumph, a move that had made them famous, a sweeping signal, a deep dive, a powerful lift that sent Jessica into the sunlit spray. The crowd was already on their feet, waiting for the magic. But Kate did not dive. She hovered, head tilted, watching in silence. For one suspended moment, time held its breath. Something had shifted, though no one yet realized just how much. Jessica raised her arm, slicing the air with the familiar cue. It was the cue that always brought gasps, the famous finale in which Kate was meant to dive deep, then surge upwards to lift her trainer into a halo of spray. For an instant, the stadium leaned forward in unison, waiting for the explosion of water and light. But Kate did not move. She lingered just beneath the surface, massive head tilted, slightly eyes fixed on Jessica. The pause was so brief, most of the crowd missed it. But on the trainer deck, silence pressed like a weight. Jessica repeated the signal, this time adding the verbal command. Relief flickered when Kate finally sank into the depths. She exhaled, convinced it was only a delay. What came next erased that hope. From below, Kate rose with terrifying speed, a black and white missile cutting through the blue. Her rostrum struck Jessica from underneath, launching her into the air. Gasps rippled through the grandstands. Some clapped, mistaking it for daring choreography. Others froze in disbelief. Jessica hit the water hard, her breath ripped from her chest. Before she could find the surface, a shadow closed in. The grip came sudden and absolute. Jaws locked across her torso, crushing, unyielding. Kate twisted, dragging her downward in a slow, deliberate spiral. It wasn't chaos, it was control, an animal asserting dominance with every coil of muscle. Above, emergency signals shrieked as handlers pounded the recall buzzer, the low pulses vibrating through the pool. But Kate ignored them. Her focus was fixed entirely on the woman in her jaws. Jessica's training screamed in her mind, conserve oxygen. Stay calm, wait for the release. But panic coiled anyway, hot and merciless, filling her chest. Water pressed from all sides, the world shrinking to cold, crushing blue. The crowd above was still divided between awe and terror, not yet realizing the line had been crossed. The performance had ended, and the world above hadn't yet realized they were no longer watching a show. Kate twisted, dragging Jessica in a slow spiral. She pressed both palms against the orca's head, pushing, signaling the release cue. Tap, twist, push, the same drill repeated hundreds of times in practice. Nothing. Kate's jaws stayed clamped, her immense strength channeled into precise, unhurried control. Above the surface, alarms blared, handlers hammering the recall buzzer, their voices sharp with urgency. The audience, at first unsure, now shifted from uneasy applause to horrified silence. Gasps cut through the music, and the first screams pierced the stadium. Jessica's lungs burned. She forced herself to remember the rules. Don't thrash, don't waste oxygen. She had drilled this scenario in safety sessions, but drills never replicated the crushing weight of 6 tons dragging you into the dark. Light fractured into ribbons above her, shimmering further away with each surge of Kate's tail. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, louder than the muffled cries echoing from the stands. Then, as if granting mercy, Kate shifted. With a sudden surge, she propelled them upward, breaking through the surface. Jessica's head burst into the air. She inhaled one ragged breath, salt chlorine, in desperation filling her chest. For a fraction of a second, hope flared. Maybe Kate would release. Maybe this nightmare could end in, as a near miss, another story whispered among trainers about instinct and control. The hope collapsed instantly. With violent force, Kate yanked her back down deeper and faster than before. The pool swallowed Jessica whole, the roar of the crowd replaced by the heavy silence of depth. Her limbs kicked against the drag, weaker now, her signals frantic but unanswered. Darkness thickened the water, colder the pressure building in her ears. This time it was not rehearsal. It was not partnership. It was instinct, raw and absolute, and Jessica was no longer a partner in the show, she was prey. The second descent was worse than the first. Kate rolled her massive body with deliberate precision, pulling Jessica through the water in a slow, spiraling arc. It was not the frantic chaos of a frightened animal. It was measured, controlled, like a predator testing its hold. Jessica's chest convulsed her body, screaming for air. She forced her mouth shut, tiny bubbles slipping past her lips as she fought to stretch the single breath she had stolen above. The pool felt endless, the blue thickening into black, every flick of Kate's tail pushing them farther from the surface. On the trainer deck, chaos erupted. Senior handlers slammed their palms against the water, shouting cues, their voices cracking from strain. The recall buzzer pulsed again and again, low-frequency waves meant to break through instinct. Kate did not flinch. Her focus was absolute. The audience no longer mistook the violence for choreography. Children cried in the stands, parents clutching them close as screams rose like a tide. Shaky phones captured what the park would never release. Jessica's arms felt heavier, with every second her practice signals weakening. She could see Kate's black eyes inches from her own, unreadable, ancient, reflecting only cold intent. Her training whispered, wait for the release, it will come. But another part of her knew the drills had always ended. This one had no script. Then abruptly, Kate shifted direction. She surged upward, carrying Jessica toward the light once more. Hope sparked. If she could just breach the surface, just draw in another breath, someone might reach her. The surface broke open above her head. Air, dazzling light, and the roar of panic hit her all at once. She inhaled desperately, and then Kate yanked her under again, harder, faster. The water slammed shut overhead. Jessica's breath tore out in a stream of bubbles, swallowed instantly by the dark. The second plunge felt final, as though the Orca had crossed a line that could not be pulled back. The pool was no longer a stage. It was a cage. And every instinct inside Kate now said, finish the hunt. The water pressed against Jessica's eardrums. As Kate drove her deeper, the pressure mounting with each violent kick of the Orca's tail. Her limbs thrashed weakly, but Kate's grip was iron jaws clamped across the thick neoprene of her wetsuit. Every motion radiated raw strength, an animal that could tow a boat now directing all of that force against a single human body. Jessica's chest convulsed again, her lungs desperate to expand. Tiny bubbles slipped past her lips in frantic bursts. She signaled, push tab twist. Nothing. Kate's black eyes cold inches away. Then came a sound, low resonant clicks reverberating through the water. Echolocation. It was as if Kate was mapping her, studying every curve of her frame, every weakening movement. The pool had become an alien world, governed not by routine but by instinct alone. On the deck, trainers shouted until their voices cracked, hammering the recall buzzer so hard the casing rattled. The low-frequency pulses pulsed through the pool again and again. Kate didn't waver. Parents clutched sobbing children in the stands, some ushered toward the exits, others frozen in horrified disbelief. Cameras continued to roll shaky footage, capturing what no one wanted to believe: the show had become a struggle for survival. Then it happened, the shift no one could ignore. As Jessica twisted in Kate's jaws, a tear opened in her wetsuit. A bloom of red unfurled from her side, swirling like smoke in the current. The Orca's response was instant. The grip tightened, movements sharpened. This was no longer dominance, no longer control. It was reflex, the hunter awakened by the scent of blood. Jessica's vision narrowed, edges darkening as her strength ebbed. The faint silver haze of the surface seemed impossibly far away, unreachable. She pushed once more at Kate's rostrum signals, weakening to a feeble tap. Above, the crowd's screams blurred into a single, unbroken wail carried on the humid air. Below, silence pressed against her ears as instinct, ancient and merciless, took full command. The water around her was no longer shimmering blue. It was streaked with red, proof that the line had been crossed and that the predator was no longer pretending. The bloom of blood spread quickly, curling into the blue like ink spilled in water. From the stands, it was unmistakable. Screams rose in unison, shattering any illusion of performance. Parents dragged their children toward the exits, some covering small eyes, others too slow, frozen by the horror unfolding below. Minutes ago, applause, now screams, and staff shouting for the crowd to flee. On the trainer deck, chaos tightened into frenzy. Two senior handlers slapped the surface with open palms, shouting commands in sharp, rhythmic bursts. Another pounded the recall button over and over, the piercing tones reverberating through the water. Yet Kate was deaf to them all. Her world had narrowed to the body in her jaws, her movements now urgent, fueled by the unmistakable metallic signal of prey. She rolled hard to the side, dragging Jessica through a violent arc, her pectoral fin grazing across the trainer's ribs like a blade. Jessica's lungs convulsed her body, screaming for air. She had no strength left to signal, no leverage against the tonnage crushing her midsection. Her vision flickered, shadows collapsing inward, edges of the world dissolving into black. Still, she fought, legs kicking, weakly hands pushing against Kate's rostrum, as if sheer will might undo what training no longer could. Then, without warning, Kate surged upward again. Light refracted above, growing larger, brighter. Jessica's head broke the surface for one desperate instant. Air rushed into her chest, ragged and choking. Hope sparked again, but only for a breath. Kate yanked her down with savage force, the second descent faster, more violent, dragging them both into the cold silence below. The audience's cries blurred into a single, unbroken wail that carried over the pool. Phones captured it all, shaking frames of thrashing water, a dark fin slicing circles, flashes of red staining the turquoise. The truth was undeniable. Now, this was no accident, no misstep in choreography. It was instinct, raw and merciless, reclaiming center stage. And Jessica was running out of breath to steal. With a sudden surge, Kate broke the surface once more, water exploding in a glittering arc. But this time, the spectacle drew no cheers. Gasps and sobs rippled through the thinning crowd as they caught sight of Jessica's body, limp in the Orca's jaws, her hair plastered across her face. Trainers shouted over one another, their voices raw with panic. Two dove in without hesitation, slicing through the water in their black wetsuits. They reached Jessica in seconds, one cradling her shoulders, the other gripping under her arms. With practiced coordination, they tugged her free from Kate's hold. The Orca rolled once, almost lazily, before slipping back into the center of the pool, her massive dorsal fin casting a black shadow across the surface. Jessica was hauled onto the trainer deck, water spilling from her mouth in shallow streams. Deep bruises already bloomed across her ribs, the neoprene torn and shredded. A medic dropped to his knees, instantly pressing his hands into her chest, compressions pounding in desperate rhythm. Another tilted her head back, forcing air into her lungs. Their voices rose above the chaos. "Come on, Jess, breathe. Stay with us," words of urgency colliding with the shrill cries of the recall buzzer, still echoing across the pool. Minutes stretched into eternity. Every second without response felt like a cliff edge, breaking away beneath their feet. The stands, once deafening with applause, were now hollow, echoing only with muffled sobs and the hurried shuffle of spectators being ushered out. Trainers crowded around, their eyes wide with disbelief, some still glancing at the water where Kate hovered silently unmoving, as though watching the scene unfold. The medic's arms trembled from exhaustion, sweat beading across his forehead. He looked up briefly, his expression already telling the truth no one wanted to hear. But still they pressed on, compressions, breath calls of encouragement that grew quieter, more desperate. After more than 10 minutes of relentless effort, the rhythm slowed and stopped. The only sound left was the lapping of water against the platform and the unbearable silence that followed. A life that had danced so fearlessly with the ocean's most powerful predator had ended here in a pool built for spectacle, and nothing would ever look the same again. In the hours that followed, Oceanland Marine Park sank into an unnatural stillness. The music that had filled the air was silenced, the stands, empty, concession stalls abandoned mid-shift. Chlorine and salt still lingered in the breeze, but now the scent was heavy with something else: grief. Trainers moved like shadows through the back corridors, their wetsuits peeled, halfway down, eyes hollow, words
Come on,
clipped to
Jess.
whispers. Kate was transferred to a medical holding pool hidden from the public.
Stay with us!
She floated near the surface, motionless, except for the slow rise and fall of her body. To the untrained eye, she looked calm, but those who knew her saw something different, a tension that lingered in every still breath, as if the act itself had carved an imprint she could not erase. The investigation began almost immediately. Officials combed through every detail: safety protocols, trainer notes, hours of rehearsal footage. Theories surfaced. Some said it was a misread cue, an accident born of routine pushed too far. Others whispered about the scent of blood, how orcas could detect it with terrifying precision. A more uncomfortable truth pressed against the conversation: that captivity itself had built the conditions for disaster. Marine biologists clashed on the airwaves. Was this tragedy inevitable, the moment wild power was caged for entertainment? Or could it have been prevented with stricter rules, sharper vigilance? Outside the gates, grief took a physical form. Candles flickered against the dusk. Flowers piled high, handwritten notes tucked between stuffed orca toys left by children who once cheered for the same show. Strangers knelt in silence, some praying, others simply staring at the pictures of Jessica, smiling beside the very animal that ended her life. Activists gathered too, holding signs that read, "Free Kate and the ocean is her home." But critics argued she could never survive in the wild after a lifetime in captivity. The crowd of mourners reflected the split that would come to define the tragedy. Was Kate a victim too, or the living embodiment of a danger we had chosen to ignore? The days that followed turned the park into a lightning rod of debate. News anchors replayed shaky cell phone footage until the images became seared into the public's mind: the black dorsal fin cutting slow circles, the sudden bloom of red, the frantic scramble of trainers pulling Jessica's body onto the deck. Talk shows filled with experts, some insisting it was a tragic inevitability, others arguing it was a preventable failure of safety and judgment. Marine biologists disagreed fiercely. One called the event a rupture of trust that was always waiting to happen. Another countered, with proper precautions, this never needed to end in blood. Oceanland itself scrambled. Within days, management announced an indefinite suspension of all water-based performances, citing both respect for Jessica and the need for review. Behind closed doors, though, the conversations turned colder: liability, insurance claims, legal exposure. Was the park to blame, or was the trainer? Each side of the debate only deepened the fracture in public opinion. Meanwhile, outside the gates, the memorial grew larger. Hundreds of visitors came daily laying roses and handwritten letters, some addressed directly to Jessica, others to Kate. One note read simply, "You gave us wonder and it cost you everything." Activists gathered in louder numbers. Their signs pointed not just at Kate's fate, but at the very system that kept orcas and tanks smaller than the ranges they were born to roam. Yet families who had grown up attending shows argued back these animals could not survive. Release their lives had been too long bound to human hands. In the clash of voices, one truth remained inescapable. The boundary between trust and instinct had been crossed in full view of thousands, and the world could no longer pretend it had not happened. Was Jessica's death a single, unrepeatable accident? Or was it the clearest warning yet that nature, no matter how carefully staged, cannot be scripted? And so the question lingered heavier than any silence in the pool. When we place wild power on a stage, are we honoring its majesty? Or are we gambling with fate itself? The pool now stands silent. The grandstands that once shook with applause are empty, their echoes replaced by the hush of unanswered questions. Kate drifts alone in her holding tank, her massive body suspended in still water, her dark eyes revealing nothing of the storm she unleashed. Jessica's name lives on through memorials, through photographs of her smiling beside the animals she trusted more than any other, and through the stories told by colleagues who still speak of her patience, her grace, and her belief that understanding could bridge even the widest divide. For nearly a decade, she embodied that belief. She climbed on Kate's back, dove beside her in the depths, and held fast to the idea that trust was stronger than instinct. And perhaps for a time it was. But instinct is older than us, older than performance, older even than our idea of control. When it surfaces, it doesn't bargain, it doesn't wait, it takes. Jessica's final moments remind us of that truth, etched not in applause, but in silence, in water, and in blood. The tragedy left more than grief in its wake. It left a question that still divides trainers, scientists, and the public alike. Are these bonds a miracle of connection or illusions waiting to shatter? When we cross the boundary between human and predator, are we embracing wonder or tempting fate? What do you believe? Was Jessica's death an unavoidable twist of destiny or a preventable disaster we refuse to see coming? Tell us in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, if you believe in asking the hard questions about where trust ends and instinct begins, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because the next story we tell may challenge you even more deeply. Jessica Radcliffe's chapter has closed, but the lesson remains open. Nature never forgets what it is. And the moment we do, the price can be everything.